What's poppin', y'all? One word that comes to mind when describing hip-hop legend Tupac Shakur is prolific. Once that man's rap career got started, he never stopped. Tupac gave us 44 singles, 50 music videos, 9 compilation projects, 4 studio albums while he was alive, and 7 more after he died. Let's not forget that his acting performance as the troubled teenager Bishop in the 1992 movie Juice opened him up to getting film roles too, all of which were starring roles. Pac co-starred with Janet Jackson in Poetic Justice, Marlon Wayans in Above the Rim, Mickey Rourke in Bullet, Tim Roth in Gridlocked, and he even starred in Gang Related. Tupac popped up in a bunch of TV shows in the 90s like A Different World, In Living Color, and even showed up on Saturday Night Live. But after selling over 36 million albums in the United States alone, over 75 million worldwide, and earning 5 #1 albums on the Billboard 200, we have to remember one crazy detail. Tupac put in all of that work in about 5 short years. Between the March to August 1991 recording of his debut album, Tupacalypse Now, which dropped on Interscope on November 12, 1991, and his fatal shooting on September 7, 1996, that brought him to his fatal demise 6 days later on September 13, 1996, Tupac created a lifetime of rap history in just half a decade. Even 26 years later, in 2022, Tupac still lands on all kinds of greatest rapper of all time lists and top 5s as well. In fact, Kendrick Lamar was only 9 years old the year Tupac was killed, but he was clearly inspired by the elder icon who also worked with super producer Dr. Dre. Kendrick Lamar told the story of how Tupac and Dr. Dre were in Kendrick's Compton neighborhood shooting the music video for California Love back in 1995. Kendrick told the story to the Recording Academy stating, "I was about 8 years old." Kendrick later recalled to the Recording Academy, "They were shooting a video in my neighborhood in Compton. My father sees them, went 2 blocks down and got me. By the time he got me, everybody was out there. It was pandemonium. He put me on his shoulders, and there they was, Dr. Dre and Tupac right there. I think it was a white Bentley. That moment right there, whether I knew it or not, branched me off to what I'm doing now. It was already designed in destiny. 15 years later, I meet Dr. Dre, and I explain that story to him, and he remembered that same exact moment, and he remembers them kids that were out there. And I said, Dre, I was one of the kids that were there. It's a crazy feeling." So how exactly did 5 years of Tupac's heavy output and success end with his still unsolved murder, legally speaking? Let's backtrack to the final 24 hours of Tupac Shakur's shooting, the situations that led up to it, and the people that were around Pac that day. If you rewind one day before Tupac got shot, it would be roughly 11:30 p.m. on September 6, 1996, when he was leaving Lacey Street Production Studios in downtown Los Angeles. This is where he finished shooting a music video for the song Toss It Up, featuring the R&B singers Casey and JoJo from Jodeci, Aaron Hall, and Danny Boy. Toss It Up would end up being the lead single from the Don Killuminati The 7 Day Theory, Tupac's first posthumous album after his death under his stage name Machiavelli. After putting in work on the music video, Tupac drives back to his mansion in the LA suburb of Calabasas and sleeps for a few hours. On the morning of September 7, 1996, Pac's cousin, Jamal El-Hussein, reminds him that they have to leave LA for a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate the birthday of one of Pac's business partners, music video producer Tracy Danielle Robinson, who started with Pac as a production assistant on his Pour Out a Little Liquor video. Tracy Danielle Robinson and her producing partner, Gobi M. Rahimi, had developed a resume of West Coast hip-hop music videos for artists like Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube, The Pharcyde, and many for Tupac Shakur as well. In fact, in the months leading up to Pac's death, Rahimi was Tupac's main music video director, getting behind the camera for I Ain't Mad at Ya, Hit 'Em Up, which he didn't get credit for, both versions of How Do You Want It, all 3 versions of Made Niggas, 2 of America's Most Wanted, and All About You. Rahimi has said that it was him who convinced Tracy Danielle Robinson, her husband, his sister, and several other production people to rent a 15-passenger van for Tracy's birthday celebration with Tupac in Las Vegas that was planned for later that night at Suge Knight's Club 662. But after Tupac was shot hours later and confined to a hospital bed, Rahimi proved that it wasn't just all business with Tupac. He was also a loyal friend to the superstar. Along for the ride to Vegas that wild day was Tupac's live-in girlfriend and fiancée, Kidada Jones, daughter of Quincy Jones, the music icon responsible for producing Michael Jackson's album Thriller, and many other art projects. But apparently this trip to Vegas wasn't something that Tupac was excited about making. But at the alleged urging of his manager Suge Knight, Pac goes along with the planned trip anyway. Kidada noticed right away that Pac seemed stressed the morning of September 7th before they traveled to Las Vegas. She assumed it was because it was due to a recent conflict that Tupac was involved in after the MTV Awards. Pac told her that he had promised Suge Knight weeks before that he would attend the Mike Tyson versus Bruce Shelton heavyweight fight in Las Vegas scheduled for later that evening at the MGM Grand. Even though he would rather not go, he didn't want to break his promise to Suge. He said she should come along, but he didn't want her at the fight around the rowdy guys that he'd be hanging around. Instead, she should come to the party that Suge was having afterwards at a club he owned in downtown Las Vegas, Club 662. While Kidada was helping Tupac pack his clothes for Vegas, she reached over for his bulletproof vest that he would normally wear, but Pac told her to leave it behind because it would be too hot to wear. During the drive, they apparently stopped at a gas station where Tupac bought 5 magazines that were all about guns, and they spent much of the drive in silence, with his focusing on the magazines until they pulled up to their hotel, the Luxor, on the Strip. Kidada's reaction to seeing the black pyramid shape of the hotel was, "God, it's so evil." Pac's friend and music video producer Rahimi gave his opinion as to why Pac may not have been too excited to spend time with Death Row on the night of his shooting. He didn't want to. I'm not sure why, but I know that he didn't want to. The last few weeks were very confusing. He was pulling away from Death Row and was done with his contract. He also had sent a letter to David Kenner firing him and letting the Row know that he was done with them. He wasn't wearing his Death Row medallion. It was all Euthanasia, Tupac's new company. I think he was just cutting loose. He had started a production company with me and Tracy and started his own record label. I think it was just him wanting independence. After Tupac had already gone platinum in just around 3 weeks with his first Death Row release, All Eyes on Me, from earlier that year in 1996, it became clear to people close to Tupac that he was already ready to leave the label and wouldn't be renewing his contract, a point that was started by his bodyguard Frank Alexander.
Tupac was ready to leave the record label, and there was a reason for it. So, that reason only his mom and immediate people within his camp would know what that reason was.
It is worth noting that by the summer of 1996, Tupac was wondering what was up with his Death Row royalties. Even after reaching around $60 million in album sales, not very much money had gone into Pac's pockets. To make matters worse, at the time of Pac's death, Death Row calculated that Tupac Shakur, arguably the biggest rapper that year, owed the label $4.9 million, with the bail money that was previously paid to get Tupac out of prison among those expenses. With Tupac reportedly wanting to sign a new record deal somewhere else once he completed his required 3-album contract, it isn't hard to see how this would rub Suge Knight the wrong way if he was away from Pac's plans. On August 27, 1996, less than 2 weeks before Tupac was killed, he had already fired David Kenner, Tupac's lawyer, who also happened to be a lawyer for Suge Knight and for Death Row. This isn't something new where we've seen artists on record labels have the same lawyer as the record labels. The fact that Kenner was representing Tupac, his record label, and his manager Suge makes it easy to see how this was a conflict of interest for Tupac. Alex Roberts, former head of business affairs at Death Row Records, clarified what he knew about Tupac wanting to leave Death Row and start his own label in an interview with LA Magazine. The rumors of Pac leaving Death Row were true. He wanted to marry Quincy Jones' daughter. Quincy said to Pac, "Are you going to be able to get out clean without any trouble? You think you'll be okay?" I told Pac, "I know Suge's been good to you, but by the same token, do you have anything in your name? Do you know how much money you have made?" Pac started thinking about it. He had all the watches, the gold jewelry, drove wherever he wanted, but nothing was in his name. I was really close to Suge, and I'd brought it up before. He'd go, "Alex, I'm doing it because they're going to take that money, whether it's $100,000 or $200,000 or $500,000, get it on a Friday, and we wouldn't see them for a week. And then they'd be calling saying, 'Hey, I'm in Vegas and I'm broke.' We owned a car dealership, West Coast Exotics, because everybody we were signing, we were giving cars to." Suge said, "Never, ever register the title in their names." Now let's bring it back to the day of Tupac's shooting. Around 3 p.m. on September 7, 1996, Tupac Shakur arrived in Las Vegas, where he was scheduled to watch a boxing match between his personal friend Mike Tyson and Bruce Shelton, who held the WBA heavyweight title for that year. Also, he was scheduled to perform at Suge Knight's Club 662 in Vegas afterwards, a performance that would never end up happening due to his shooting. Tupac insisted that his girlfriend Kidada, who he had considered having children with, and cousin Jamala stay behind in their hotel room for their safety, and he hit the casino table with his bodyguard Frank Alexander and Pac's crew, the Outlaws Immortals, where he was winning big at the crap table. Fast forward to 6:15 p.m., and Tupac and his entourage headed out to the Tyson vs. Sheldon fight at the MGM Grand, where Pac was attracting a lot of attention from fans. Boxer Bruce Sheldon would definitely not last very long in the ring with Tyson, who defeated him by a first-round knockout that happened in just 1 minute and 49 seconds. This became one of the shortest heavyweight championship fights in boxing history. Mike Tyson and Tupac had already become close friends years earlier. In fact, when Tyson met Tupac for the first time at an after-party at a nightclub called the Hollywood Palladium, the boxer had never even heard of the rapper yet. Mike Tyson invited him to come inside the club, with Tupac pulling in 50 other people as well. After entering the club, Pac grabbed a mic and started rapping, earning everyone's respect, including Tyson's, and they had stayed friends ever since. Tupac was so loyal to Mike Tyson that he even visited the heavyweight star when he was incarcerated in an Indiana prison between 1992 and 1995. And Tyson told this story to the Drink Champs podcast, stating, "I had everybody, B.B. King, James Brown, Whitney Houston, Lawrence Henderson, everybody came. I can't even name them all. Just so many people came to visit me. I get a call from somebody. It's Tupac's mother. She explains how she knows me from her son. Explains that I met him at a club one night and that he wants to come and visit me. I said, great, okay. Once he came into the visiting room and there was all these hillbilly hicks, mean, mother effing Aryan guys. As soon as he came up, everybody started clapping. They respected him. Soon as he came in the room, they started applauding. After Mike Tyson took down Bruce Sheldon, Tupac was hyped off the fight and celebrated the victory with his crew of friends, entering the lobby of the MGM Grand around 8:35 p.m. that night on September 7, 1996. Suddenly, one of Death Row's associates started whispering in Tupac's ear that he had spotted a man that he claimed had robbed him several weeks earlier. This identified man would be Orlando Anderson, member of the Southside Crips, rivals of the Piru Bloods gang that Suge Knight was affiliated with. Tupac allegedly runs up on Orlando Anderson on site and starts swinging on him, with Pac's entourage jumping in and stomping Orlando out. By 9 p.m., the beatdown had already ended, and Tupac and his crew were heading back to their hotel rooms to change their clothes and get ready to roll out to Suge's club, where Tupac was planning to perform and connect with his music video friends Tracy Robinson and Gobi Rahimi. Tupac goes up to his room to change into a basketball jersey and baggy sweats, retelling the story of his own Tyson blows that had just taken place during the Orlando Anderson beating to his cousin Jamala and fiancé. Pac and his crew were off to the club, but first they made a pit stop at Suge Knight's mansion, which was located up the street from Mike Tyson's mansion, for some pre-game partying where Tupac makes a request of his bodyguard Frank Alexander, who states,
I was walking to the car with Suge and with Tupac, and I was actually opening up the back door to get in the back seat, and Pac stopped and said, no, take the keys and go drive the Lexus with the Outlaws in it, because we're going to be drinking and you're going to be the designated driver to drive us back after we've finished partying over at 662.
It has been said that Pac was telling his bodyguard not to be in the same car with him, and encouraged by Pac's manager Suge Knight himself, who apparently wanted to speak privately with Tupac on the drive over to the club. Interestingly enough, the permits for Tupac's security to carry firearms were allegedly never filed. Suge was waiting for him in the lobby. Suge slid into the driver's seat of his brand new black 1996 BMW 750 sedan, and Tupac was in the passenger's side next to Suge with the windows rolled down. Shortly before getting shot, a photographer took their picture at a red light on the Vegas Strip. Then, shortly after, the moment that would end Tupac's career and his young 25-year-old life took place. A white Cadillac was riding down, and Keefe D says that he saw Tupac hanging outside the window. They rolled up to the right side of Suge's BMW, and they said it looked like Tupac was reaching for a firearm. Shots started flying. Keefe D's statement is that his window was rolled down in the backseat, and the arm of the shooter blasts 13 bullets from a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson Glock 22. He says he first saw Suge get shot in the head and thought he was for sure dead. He said that Orlando Anderson was the shooter instead of him because they were on his side of the back passenger seats. Otherwise, he would have been the shooter. The time was 11:15 p.m., and he debunked the claims that Suge used Tupac as a shield because Suge took the first bullet wound and was severely injured with that graze to the head. Tupac's bodyguard, Frank Alexander, was driving the Lexus behind Suge and Pac and detailed the violent event that unfolded. Once we got to the Flamingo, we made a right-hand turn. We came to a stoplight, which was Koval. As it got closer to the BMW, the arm came out and the gun just started firing. After the Cadillac shot into the car, I thought they were dead. My reaction was to run up to the car and stay until the car took off. I didn't know what to think. It was a fog. It was a haze. Were these real bullets? Did they really shoot these guys? Tupac was struck 4 times, with Suge only getting grazed by a bullet. Alton McDonald, also known as Bountry, one of Suge Knight's very close associates, also had his black Toyota Supra shot at, according to Suge Knight's head of security, Reggie Wright Jr. He would not only return shots at the white Cadillac, but also chase it down. Pac was hit twice in the chest, once in the thigh, and once in the arm. One of the bullets punctured Tupac's right lung, and he was rushed to University Medical Center to undergo 2 emergency operations. His entire right lung had to be removed just to prevent internal bleeding. Pac was placed into a medically induced coma. Unfortunately, after 6 days in the hospital bed, this would be a coma that Tupac would never wake up from again. Over at Club 662, the word was starting to spread around about Pac getting shot and being taken to the medical center. Tracy Robinson and Gobi Rahimi would be told about Pac's bloody fate by death row artist Nate Dogg in the club. Rahimi detailed just how dangerous the hospital felt when he was standing by Tupac's side from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. during the 6 days during Pac's failed recovery. It was the scariest 6 nights of my life. There were undercover FBI agents, the police weren't helping, and I got one of the death threats. The marketing director came up to me on the 3rd day and said, "They called the row. They're going to come to finish him off." Then he walked away. So I called Vegas PD and said, "Send the troops. They're going to come finish Tupac off." The lady came back on the phone and said, "Sir, we're a little understaffed right now. So if anything should happen, go get the foot patrol in the hospital." Immediately, I was like, something's a little off here. I remember that earlier that day, we had a press conference. So I called all the local news stations and said, every hour there will be a news conference. And I thought at least there will be people here with cameras if stuff were to go down. It was just chaos and no support. We didn't trust death row. We didn't trust anyone. After all that happened, there was a Southern old security guard in the corner, and he started chuckling and was like, "Son, I've got to tell you, last year there was a white rodeo star who broke his leg, and the Vegas Police Department gave him 4 policemen and 6 wagons for his family and friends to be comfortable." I thought, isn't that a hoe that the #1 rapper in the world can be laid up in the hospital and can't get any sort of security? Part of that is indicative to all the racial divide in this country that's still going on today. During Pac's medically induced coma, his head was said to have been swollen to twice its normal size, eyes filled with mucus, gauze placed over his wounds, and a finger on one of his hands was missing. Kidada Jones lost her fiancé and wrote about this painful moment in her father Quincy Jones's book, Q, the autobiography of Quincy Jones. Tupac was the love of my life. He and I lived together for 4 months, and then he was murdered in Las Vegas in 1996. It was the most horrible thing that ever happened to me. I knew we should have never gone to Vegas that night. I had a horrible feeling about it. I've gone over it in my mind a million times. It wasn't supposed to happen. We weren't supposed to be there. It was the worst possible thing that could have happened. I still, to this day, don't know who shot him. I wasn't able to say goodbye. It's not something that should happen to anyone. Who killed Tupac remains anyone's guess. Over the years, the suspects have included East Coast rappers Notorious B.I.G. and P. Diddy, the owner of Bad Boy Records, that Pac and Suge had been feuding with, Orlando Anderson and his Crip set, Suge's enemies, Suge's friends, and hell, some conspiracy theorists even say Suge himself. In fact, Suge Knight refused to cooperate with the investigation, stating at the time, "I don't get paid to solve homicides." Ultimately, it all ended with the cremation of Tupac Shakur's body and the ashes given to his mother, Afeni Shakur. Throughout Tupac's large catalog of music, the theme of getting killed, life and death, and dying young came up over and over again in his lyrics. Unfortunately, these visions of his future came true and happened far too soon.